So, okay? Step 2, developing an internal dialogue. I'm going to read a little of this because there's a section in here on this section too that's on internal dialogue. And it's probably, I don't know what, 2, 4, 6, 8 or 10 pages, something like this. And this section in this book is, without a question, without a doubt, the clearest, most complete statement that he makes about this process. What it means in simple language is if we don't do conscious internal dialogue, what we end up doing is jabbering. What's sometimes been called the monkey mind. And the mind just talks and talks and talks. And we once again end up in that loop of trying to stop the thinking. We say, oh, teacher, how do I stop this mind? We're back to what we were talking about a minute ago. How do I stop the thinking? How do I stop the mind? And you can't stop the mind. Person after person has discovered this ultimately doesn't work. We can try to blast it away with mantra. That doesn't work. That's not suggested. I encourage you to watch repeatedly Swami Rama's video lecture entitled, it's 87 minutes long, entitled, How to Tread the Path of Superconscious Meditation. And in that video lecture, the very first sentence out of his mouth is something like this. I am going to systematically explain to you the entire process of meditation. Sentence 1. Then we get to watch it and make a decision. He said, sentence 1, that this was his intent. I'm going to explain to you systematically the entire process. Is he teasing us? He didn't really mean it, or did he mean it? When he made the statement, I'm going to explain the entire process to you. Another question we can ask ourselves, did he succeed or did he fail? Oops. And my invitation has been to people often, watch this video once a week for a year, and then come with your questions. And a few people I know have embarked on doing that. Not many, but a few. And I went to that because of thinking in there's a point where he talks about it's relatively easy to get your body still. Relatively easy to get your breathing smooth. Not totally easy, but relatively easy. He says, then there's these thoughts. He says, what to do next? He says, he actually out of his mouth says, what to do next? You don't know what to do next. You start doing japa, repeating of mantra. Next thing he says is, that's not helpful. I'm not making that up. That's what Swamiji said. It's not helpful. You know. The point again is that it's not about suppressing thoughts. It's not what it's about. And if it's the habit of mind to talk. Now this is my way of saying, I'll take a moment here to throw in my little 2 cents worth. What most of it's very common when I start talking about internal dialogue with people and pointing this out to them, what's in this section of this chapter here. It's very common that someone will say, well, that's my problem. I'm already doing dialogue. I can't get it to shut up. To which I say back, most of the time, I said, no, that's not called dialogue. That's called monologue. There's a bunch of talking going on, but nobody's listening. Dialogue is a two-way street. Somebody's talking and somebody's listening. So somewhere in this section here, he talks about making a friend of your mind. We've turned our minds into enemies. And our minds ought to be our friends. Let's see if I can find this little spot here. This is on the last page of this section. I'll start on the page before. When you have a self-dialogue, you may realize that God has graced you with everything. It's just a way of telling the story. Your wife is good, your children are good, your parents are good, you have everything. So who creates problems for you if you are not at peace? Question mark. Your mind, period. You can have a dialogue with the mind and tell the mind, quote, when you do this to me, you are perhaps the greatest sufferer. You suffer and make the body suffer. That's you, whoever you are, talking to the mind. Mind, you're suffering and you're making the body suffer too. Here's the last sentence of the quote. Please be my friend. It's a direct suggestion. This is not some cutesy, poetic little metaphor. It's something that really is meant. And I've done this with groups of people. I have 20 people sitting there. We do a little exercise and sit down. And I'll say, would you please repeat inside these words? And I'll actually, usually I have to prepare people, say, would you please inside your own head say your own name? Okay, did you do it? Yes. Did you do it? And I'll ask, did you actually say your own name inside? Yes, they said their own name inside. So that's the way I'm wanting to ask you. I'll say, now would you please repeat after me? Because this is something that most of us are not accustomed to doing. We're accustomed to a mind jabbering and causing trouble. So it's not easy to train the mind, but we can do it. So I'll say, okay, would you please repeat after me inside your head and just observe what happens. Just say these words inside your head. Mind, will you please be my friend? I'll say, now, just in case you didn't say it, would you do it again? And notice the reaction. Just whatever happens inside is okay. Just say, mind, will you please be my friend? And then I'll ask people, did anything happen? What happened? And one of the responses that it's the humorous side of me just really enjoys is the one, and it happens commonly. Somebody will say, I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden inside, it was like somebody inside said no. And somebody else will be equally surprised when all of a sudden out of nowhere inside came yes. But the no is, it's the least expected. Where did that come from? And then also say, okay, now would you please ask your mind, why did you say no? And I'll do that. I'll say, repeat the words, because I'm wanting to, you want to dialogue. You want it to be a two-way street. If somebody outside says, would you like another cup of chai? Somebody answers, yeah, I'd like another cup of chai. Or no thank you. Somebody answers. So we already know how to do this, we're just not practicing it. So somebody says, why did you say you wouldn't be my friend? And a common sort of response to that is something like, because you never pay me any attention. Our functioning mind as a unit, as a thing unto itself, it's like a little person. It's like its own person. And we, as I, whoever I am, that's part of the process of internal dialogue, is to figure out who am I that's doing the talking, and who am I talking to. And Swamiji describes that in here. And the key to it is it just takes practice. It takes practice doing it and not feeling like you're crazy or somebody, little men in white, are going to come and lock you up into a psychiatric unit because you're talking to yourself. And one of the kinds of people that I most enjoy teaching this to is practicing clinical psychologists. Who, most of them that I know that's happened with, they actually take to it quite nicely, and they become good exemplars of that you don't go crazy from practicing internal dialogue. It's not the same as psychosis or schizophrenia or anything like that. It's learning to become a friend with your mind. And as Swamiji said here, the part I just read, it's you just have to do it. Now, I'm not saying that to say that nobody in the world has ever gotten enlightened without following step number 2 of Swami Rama. I'm not saying it like that. But the fancy word, one of the fancy words for this is vichara. It's contemplation. And it leads to a very high order of contemplation. Once you see it, once you practice it, and the more we do in following these principles and practices, and then when time avails itself to have a conversation with somebody else who's been doing this a long time and can coach or guide in how to do deep contemplations, in any contemplation, what's the mechanism that's being used? Words. When you do contemplation, when you do meditation, you're setting aside words. But when you're doing contemplation, you're using words to go beyond words. That's dialogue. So when we talk about internal dialogue, we're learning the root skill that later allows us to do a very high order of dialogue. If you're doing prayer that is not ritualistic prayer, but that is literally communing with the self, the truth, the Atman, the Brahman, whatever you want to call it, within. What is the mechanism that's being used for prayer? Words. And it may start out, with prayer, it may start out sort of ritualistic out of the religion of one's youth. You're taught, say these words, and it's called a prayer. But later on, hopefully, that evolves into a dialogue with however you perceive truth or reality or divinity or God or whatever, however you perceive that to be. So the instrument of prayer is dialogue. The instrument of contemplation is dialogue. And so here we're being introduced with, how do I do dialogue? How do I practice dialogue in a constructive way? One of the most important simple things is when thoughts come to mind. You say, is this useful or not useful? I've explored enough that I have some personal sense of what the goal of life is about, in my own words, my own perception. And then that can become a benchmark against decisions in life. Something comes up, should I do it or should I not do it? Well, is it useful or not useful on the basis of my goal of life, the direction I'm going with what I'm doing? And answers come. Answers come. It's the principle that is essentially the same as allow your conscience to be your guide. Should I do it or not? And sometimes our habit patterns, our aversions and attractions or addictions speak. And they come to the front. You know, should I have the 7th scoop of ice cream? And you know you shouldn't do it. But some little voice comes up from inside, well, but the threshold of too much ice cream is around 10 scoops and you've only had 7, so have one more. And then you get a sore tummy and you know inside that, but you don't listen. So sometimes there's a rationalization that goes on there, but you're getting a feedback loop, and gradually that buddhi part is coming to the surface more and more. And it all comes from internal dialogue. Somebody's talking and somebody's listening. And gradually along the way, we sort out who's doing the talking. It leads you to the question. It takes this question, and it's not a question that you read by some sage in some book or something like that that says, practice this contemplation. Who am I? I am that. It's not just doing something like that. It really introduces you to a dialogue yourself, and you naturally have this question. Wait a minute, who's talking here? I get this a lot from people. I've been doing this now, and I've started to realize, who am I talking to? And who's doing the talking? Who am I that's doing the talking, and who is that I'm talking to? And I'm not trying to answer that right now, but to say, explore it. And it's one of the beautiful things that happens with just diving into the internal dialogue process. And it can be as simple as, mind, will you please be my friend? We've been fighting for years. I'm tired of fighting with you anymore. I don't know what to do. But please, can we be friends? Can we be friends, mind? And even if the mind says no initially, keep asking. And somewhere along the way, probably not too long, mind will say, okay, we'll give it a try. And something happens. And then that deeper part of the mind will start to be the counselor within. It will start counseling, teacher within will increasingly guide. And increasingly we come to know when it's ego speaking and when it's wisdom, and we sort it out. And it's a very useful thing.